And thank you for joining us here today. As we begin, let me first highlight the hashtag for this event. First things first, of course. It is hashtag SkyBaym, SCIBAYM, SkyBaym. And you can post to Twitter or Instagram any of your ideas or impressions of the event today. I'm Mary Chaco. I'm a professor and director of undergraduate interdisciplinary studies here at Rutgers School of Communication and Information, and I'm chair of the Social Media and Society Research Cluster, which is the principal sponsor of today's event. And it's a particular pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Nancy Baym, principal researcher at Microsoft Research. I have been a fan and a friend of Nancy's for many years. We move in the same research circles, study similar things, online community, even got started kind of around the same time. We're both crazed for music, and we were even born in the same town in Illinois. But somehow we've only met in person twice before today. Most of our interaction has taken place on social media, and we are proof that you can build a genuine connection that way. Nancy is a true superstar in the world of internet and social media research. Her book, Personal Connections in the Digital Age, which is now in its second edition, is a classic, and I suspect that her current book, Playing to the Crowd, soon will be. To tell us more about it, please help me welcome to Rutgers the wise and the wonderful. Too much, or is that good? Dr. Nancy Baym.
Thank you. That's very generous of you. It's really nice to be here. I've known so many people who've come through one of the other departments in this program, and they're all wonderful. So it's really great to finally have the chance to be here and see what it all looks like. And it's really quite impressive. I'm having a great time already. So I'm very happy to be here to have the chance to tell you about my new book, which is a labor of love that took many, many years. It's called Playing to the Crowd. It looks like that. Some of you may have seen it up close and personal. So this book came about because I got kind of bored in the mid-2000s with only talking to scholars. And I thought, I know a lot about audiences. Wouldn't it be fun to start sort of blogging about audiences, and maybe some people who have them would pay attention, or people thinking about them who aren't in the academy would pay attention. And because I am a huge music fan, I was sometimes paying special attention to music audiences. And as a consequence of this, I started getting invited to music industry events to talk about how to connect with your audience and how to engage your audience. And when I was there, what would often happen would be that there would be these pundits on stage, some of whom were musicians, some of whom were label people, some of whom were independent consultants and things like that. And they would be advising artists that they should connect and engage with their audience, and that was a way to monetize them. And the artists would be raising their hands and asking questions like, do I have to be on Flickr? Is Flickr important? I don't know what to Flickr. Or what am I supposed to say when I'm there? What am I supposed to do? So I got really interested as a communication scholar between the disconnect between the simplistic idea of connection and the lived reality of actually trying to connect with people. And what did it mean to be trying to live that? So this project has been guided by that question of what is it like to try to connect with audiences? And as it took shape, there are two particular questions that I really honed in on, which were the question of how do musicians understand their interactions and relationships with their audiences, and how has that changed because of social media? So those are the two guiding questions. And what I did methodologically was to interview about 40 artists, a variety of genres from about 6 different countries. I tried to focus on artists who had audiences before social media got big so that they could reflect on the difference between now and then, because one thing that happens is either that people think it's always been the way it is now, or people think that everything is completely new, and often it's somewhere, it's somewhere in between. In addition to the interviews, which were the real heart of the project, I collected example after example as they came up in the world around me. If you pay any attention, you know things like, oh, this week, Nicki Minaj her fans are having a toxic battle with one another. Oh, this week, the Bayhive has gone after something, right? It's like you don't have to look hard to find constant examples of audiences doing interesting things. So I gobbled them all up. So press coverage, and then also I was going to music industry events like I just talked about. I was going to concerts. I was just paying continuous attention and being immersed in this world. And I also, in the book, although I'm not going to talk about it today, do some autoethnographic reflection on my own history as a fan prior to and after the internet happens and social media happen. Methodologically, I can get into that, but basically, close iterative analysis is what I would say. A lot of time organizing and reorganizing and coding and recoding and thinking through how do these things fall into clusters and what are the themes and what makes people different from each other or similar to one another and so on. So I want to start by giving you a quote that exemplifies the moment that we're in and the sense of difference that people feel. So this is Mark Kelly from a band called Marillion, a British sort of prog rockish band. And he told me, in the old days, pop stars, rock stars used to just drop out of the sky, didn't they? And now they're tweeting about what they had for breakfast or, you know, whatever. Interesting days, though. It's one of those things I suppose people are still trying to find out, where to draw the boundaries and what works and what doesn't, you know? So this contrast between the old days, where there was this tremendous, not just a remove between the audience and the star, but a remove where the rock stars were elevated, right? They were in the sky, they were holy, right? They were way up there, and we were the little people down there just waiting for them to drop down now and then. And now they're at our level, right? We're having breakfast together. And so where do you redraw the boundaries when you've got that shift that's happened? And you see this boundary shift toward a more intimate kind of connection really, really clearly with music. But one of the things that I want to argue is that music is at the leading edge of a curve and you see this same kind of thing happening in a huge variety of fields across the board, especially creative labor, but not just creative labor. Definitely not just creative labor. All right. So here's the outline of how I want to do this. I want to talk a bit about the idea that music is a predictive social science, and in particular, I want to think about the way that the internet itself was predicted by music, or the way that music activity on the internet really predicted the direction that the internet was going to go. I want to talk a bit about the idea that music is a mode of communication, because often we think, you know, I imagine that the music department at Rutgers is not part of the communication department. That's probably over in fine arts if you have one, and it's thought of as something very separate, but music is absolutely a mode of communication, and I want to think about what that means a bit. And at the same time, it's a communication, it's also a business, and I want to think about the conflicts that brings about. Spend a bit of time on how social media platforms afford particular kinds of relational dynamics that bring about particular kinds of tensions, and then wrap up by thinking about who are the winners and losers in all of this. The French polymath Jacques Attali has described music as a predictive social science, and what he means by this is that most cultural transformations, if you look back at them, you see that it happened in music first, or in music culture first. And I found this a little bit of a fantastical idea, but I was completely persuaded by the example after example after example that I've seen. Individualism, for example, you see very early when individual singers step out of the choir. So instead of the Gregorian chant where everybody is singing the same thing and nobody is supposed to stand out, suddenly there are soloists who are supposed to get the attention, right? So just one example of a very deep cultural shift you see very early in music. If you look at the internet, you see music fans in particular being extremely influential in the way that the internet is shaped. So a sort of secret history of the internet we don't think a lot about is that one of the earliest nodes in the internet was at Stanford, UC Berkeley, the Bay Area. There were some other things happening in the Bay Area in that same historical time period. We're talking 1969. 1970, 1971. The Deadheads were, like the biggest political force in San Francisco, basically. And the people who were working in the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab and other computer science labs at Stanford were big deadheads. And one of the things they did very, very early in the history of the internet, what became the internet, was to start mailing lists where they could do things like exchange Grateful Dead tickets when they had spares, even just in-house. Hey, guys down the hall, I got some spare tickets. You want them? So that's one of the things giving rise to mailing lists is the need to exchange Grateful Dead tickets. Not the only, but one of them. Another thing that they did was to take all of the Grateful Dead's lyrics and digitize them and print them out. So this huge printed out pile of Grateful Dead lyrics, which they gave to John Perry Barlow, who was reportedly so impressed that he decided that computers were really the future of everything. And John Perry Barlow, you may or may not know, he became the founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a very important character in the history of cyberculture. He also was a Grateful Dead lyricist, so another nice marriage. Another early example of the overlap between music and computing and how you see music at the head of computing. This is community memory, which was the first community computer network. It was in Berkeley. This was its very first node, its very first public computer. They put it in a place. I'll reveal it in a moment. They put it there, and you could go there, and you could put in a quarter, and you could write something. You could read about things for free. So it was really functioning as a bulletin board, and you can see in the image on the right that it's, in fact, in front of a literal bulletin board. Where did they put this very first one? In a record store in Berkeley. So again, music fans at the center of the community that's seeking to be remembered. That was 1973. Leopold's Records. I don't know if any of you were there. And then there's this site, which, we often sort of chuckle when we see MySpace today. Those of us who can remember 2002 when MySpace happened, before that, we didn't talk about social networking sites. They existed, right? There were some out there. Black Planet, for example, was going strong. So there were social networking sites that were serving particular populations who were seeking one another. But there was not a mainstream one that had broken through on a large scale before MySpace. And how did MySpace do it? They were in Los Angeles, and they very intentionally, from the start, seeded it with the musicians and their fans in the Los Angeles music scene. They used music in order to break. And from its inception, it featured MySpace music. So music was always foregrounded on the platform. And on your own page, you could put in your favorite songs and things like that. So they made it quite intentionally music-friendly. So what I want to argue is that what we see now, if we think about music as predicting the future, is that music is predicting a trend toward employment that seems to, I think is very important here because we don't really have huge amounts of empirical evidence that it does, seems to depend on building and sustaining semi-intimate relationships with these crowds who knows who's in them, and they're on all different kinds of platforms, and they're changing all the time, and you have to be staying somehow in touch with all of them and making them feel like they kind of know you if you want to have a career in the future. And that's very much the case for musicians, and it's increasingly the case for others as well. And again, I want to emphasize the seems to, because the gospel is that it does. But as an empiricist, I would like to see some really large-scale big data studies showing that, in fact, it does. Well, should we let him in?
I don't know.
Let's laugh. Let's do something. Everybody stick out your tongue or turn around. I'm going to keep on going. So another thing that music predicts is the gig economy. And if you think about it, where does the word gig come from, right? A gig is a musical job. It's a night, you've got a gig. Musicians are often held up as the exemplary gig worker. So this is from Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it talks about Ryan Heenan, who writes jingles, and he celebrates that he can work whenever, wherever, as long as he's got an internet connection. It's so great. And indeed, there are a lot of things about working as a musician that do exemplify the best qualities of gig work. You do have freedom. You do have autonomy. You do get to do work that is in touch with your emotions. You don't have to necessarily put on a uniform and pretend to be somebody else because your boss says you have to, as is the case in so many jobs. At the same time, musicians also exemplify a lot of the challenges of gig work. It's extremely precarious. You never know that you're going to have a next gig. You have to be very mobile. It's hard to be in one place. You have to be solely responsible for your own failures and successes, especially the failures, so that if you aren't successful, it's always because you weren't working hard enough, so there's always more work to be done. So musicians are a great way to think about gig work. They're also a great way to think about the emotional and affective angles of gig work and of work in our contemporary economy in general, which, as the labor sociologist Lisa Adkins has talked about, is ever more feminized in the sense that more and more work is about creating feelings in other people, creating experiences for people. Some people have talked about it as hostessing, more and more hostessing kind of labor. A lot of attention to aesthetics and appearance and creating emotional experiences for others. And of course, Arlie Hochschild's book, The Managed Heart, is a touchstone in thinking about this kind of work. And she talks about the concept of emotional labor, which is a term that probably many of you have heard, and probably few of you have ever actually read this book or seen what the definition of emotional labor is. And I mention that because it's just sort of a pet peeve that it's a very overused term because it resonates so much, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But she was pretty precise in the way that she was talking about it. What she was arguing was that a shift had happened so that people were being employed to perform displays of feeling in order to create feeling in other people. So about 2/3 of the book is about flight attendants and the ways that a major airline trained flight attendants in how to smile and be pleasant in order to calm frightened or unruly passengers. And some of it was about repo men and how they are trained and evaluated in terms of their ability to intimidate and create fear through their emotional displays. So you can see the subtitle is The Commercialization of Human Feeling, and she was concerned about, well, what happens when the service becomes the display of feeling, and what does that do to the self whose emotional displays are now the product that they're selling and what they're being evaluated on by supervisors. And that by supervisors and training pieces are very important for Hochschild, and very different in the case of musicians, where there is no training, there are no supervisors, there isn't an organization that's telling them what to do and evaluating them based on what they do. Since that we're seeing a real boom in thinking about labor and thinking about the kinds of labor that are happening on social media as people try to make livings in various ways through social media. So I just throw up some books that think about this these days. Kylie Jarrett's Feminism, Labor, and Digital Media, The Digital Housewife, is a really nice book that if you want a one-stop shop for understanding Marxist feminism as it applies to the internet, this book is a godsend. Venture Labor by Gina Neff is about workers in Silicon Alley in New York City and the ways that they took risks in order to succeed in digital media in ways that mirrored venture capital, but instead of outside people coming in and putting lots of money in, they put their own work in. Status Update by Alice Marwick thinks about branding, self-branding in Silicon Valley and the ways that people there felt that they needed to maintain a lively and engaged online presence if they wanted to be able to be hired. And Brooke Duffy's new book, not getting paid to do what you love is about fashion bloggers and beauty bloggers and the ways that they hope to become professional or to somehow make a living doing this and how much work they put in. She talks about it as aspirational labor. So you get emotional labor, venture labor, aspirational labor. There's no shortage of labors. We could throw in immaterial labor, affective labor. There's so many labors. Yet I'm going to give you yet another one. And I'm going to do it because there's something missing from all of these other kinds of labor, which is not to say that they're wrong. It's fractal, right? You can look at it from any angle and you see different things. So it's all pieces of a puzzle, and work is changing a lot. So by throwing in another labor, what I want to do is just shine a light on particular kinds of processes that you might not see if you didn't have a way to frame them. So I'm framing them as relational labor. And what I mean by this is that kind of ongoing, continuous work. Hochschild is talking about single-shot encounters, right? You're on the airplane, the flight attendant is dealing with the customers on that flight, they get off the flight, they may never see those customers again. Relational labor, you're dealing with these same people over and over and over. People may be coming and going, but you're still dealing with the same people repeatedly. And so you have to create ongoing relationships with them, which takes a lot of different kinds of work. And so it's interactive, it's affective, it's material, it involves objects and things. It's cognitive, it requires understanding and frames of reference and expertise and knowledge and learning more and more things. And it's ongoing, it never really stops. So this is when I say music is a form of predictive social science, my argument is that what's being predicted right now is a shift to more and more relational labor. And much of the book tries to explicate what is this relational labor that musicians are doing. To think about the relational labor, I think one thing that's incredibly important to understand is that music is a form of communication, and that thus the relational component comes very, very naturally because music has always been at its core about relationship. If you think about music's history, depictions of music throughout history, and music still in many parts of the world, music is what Tom Torino has called participatory music. And what's meant by that is that everybody present is participating in the musical experience. You don't have some people who are performers and other people who are the audience. Instead, you have all the people who are doing it, right? If you think about scenes like this, it really makes no sense to say, who's the audience? Who's the musician, right? Everybody is audience, everybody is musician. It's just who's got an instrument in their hand at any given moment. Torino has argued that music meets really different needs and ways of being human than language. I always like to see a show of hands of how many people know what this is a picture of. I didn't, I'll tell you, I didn't until I started this project. Okay, nobody, great. This is my favorite, huh? It is a flute, it is a bone flute. It's made of bird bone. It has fixed pitch, the notes are a particular amount apart, which is a scale that's still in use in a number of parts of the world. The finger holes are beveled so that they fit fingers very, very nicely. There used to be a mouthpiece which was affixed with adhesive. This particular artifact is approximately 40,000 years before Christ. Okay, one of the earliest pieces of technology ever found. It's a musical instrument. I'll point out that 40,000 years before Christ is 30,000 years before money, which means that when we talk about the value of music in terms of finances, we're just really being dumb, right? We're being really ignorant about history, because if the value of music was money, then explain to me how it lasted 30,000 years before money got invented, right? It just doesn't make sense. Clearly, it's serving functions that are not economic. Its value is not economic. Any economic value music has exists only because of its communicative value. If we think about its communicative value, part of what music is able to do is to operate at this incredibly intimate level of helping us understand our own feelings, feelings that we can't articulate. Or as one of my very favorite singer-songwriters, Nacho Vegas, who is a Spanish singer-songwriter, explained to me, when you talk to a friend, you think in a logical way. But there's another way of communicating to people, a way that has nothing to do with logic, with your reason. And these are the confusing things that you have to put in songs. And he says, when you get them in songs, you still don't really understand them, but at least you can step out of them and you can see them. And as a listener, when you hear a song that really resonates for you, you've had that experience, right? If you don't, it's not like you can name the feeling, but you find some sort of self-recognition in the sound, and you feel a little more able to manage whatever feeling it is that you're having. So music often serves this very, very personal function, this very intimate function of communicating things that are inside us that we just can't fully articulate, which is part of the reason that it works so well for helping people bond, right? Because if you are drawn to the same music, people feel like, well, we got something in common, right? We're part of the same tribe. There's something, we're having similar experiences somehow, which may or may not be true, but you sort of feel that. Or as Nacho Vegas said, it's beautiful and strange at the same time. But it's not just at this very personal level that music is able to communicate. It also ripples up to every level of scale, which is a particularly powerful aspect of music's communicative value. So as Georgina Bourne put it, music inflects existing social relations from the most concrete and intimate to the most abstract of collectivities. And then she runs through a range of levels of social organization that you can see music not just reflecting, but affecting and changing. So nations, social hierarchy, class, race, gender, sexuality, institutional forces, patronage, market exchange, cultural institutions, or late capitalism's multipolar cultural economy, right? We've got it all. It's all there. Music affects all of it. And it's true. You can go into any one of those topics and you can write a billion articles about how music is operating there and what music is doing there. Even as music has this very, very powerful social communicative power, it is increasingly co-opted by economics and by business, to the extent that now when people say the phrase the value of music, they're thinking in terms of, is it 99 cents or should it be more? Rather than, how do we understand gender and sexuality and class and identity and groups and religion and God and all of those things. Music has not always been a business, obviously, if it precedes business by tens of millennia. At least in the West, music becomes a business sort of emerging, it sort of begins to happen around 1100. So on the one hand, that's a really long time ago. And on the other hand, if we're thinking 40,000 years BC, it's pretty recent, right? And one sort of thing that led to it was the invention of notation. And notation we don't really think of as a technology, but notation is very much a technology. It's a storage technology, right? It's a storage and replication technology that allows music for the first time to become an object that can be passed from person to person, rather than an experience you have to be present to participate in. The fact that it's written down also means that you can sign it, right? You can say, this is mine, I wrote this, which means authorship becomes possible. Composer becomes a concept that can exist. And by extension, lone genius becomes a myth that we can bring into being, so that Bach and Mozart and all of these people become geniuses, right? Something that would be very hard to have without the technology of notation that allows them to claim that work as their own and to replicate it elsewhere. Another early technology that's very powerful in making music into a business is the concert hall. This is a European opera hall. There's a really wonderful book by a man named Christopher Small, where each chapter is an analysis of a different moment in going to a concert in a concert hall. And one of the points that he makes is that the whole architecture of this space is designed to foster particular kinds of relationships. So if you think about what this space sets up, it sets up, not unlike this space we're in right now, right, that this is where the people who deserve attention are, the important ones, the distinctive ones who are individuals, right? These people are all the same, and they're all supposed to sit down and shut up while these guys are the only ones who are allowed access to the floor. It's not a coincidence that this thing here is not just called a stage, but is also called a platform, right? It is the original platform. And when we use the word platform to talk about Twitter or Facebook, as my colleague Tarleton Gillespie has written about, it's a metaphor, right? And it's a metaphor of the stage. And when we understand it as a metaphor of the stage, we also need to understand that stages create particular kinds of social dynamics. They're not neutral turf. And I'll return to that when I talk about platform affordances. When we get to recording, we reach the point where for the first time you can actually hear music without musicians present. It's predated just a little bit by the player piano, but recording means that in your own home, you can, for the first time, hear music from all around the world performed by the best people at it in the world, in your own home, which we could take completely for granted now, but was completely transformative. Had a lot of consequences, like people started thinking that they weren't very good at making music because suddenly they had something to compare it to. So I imagine there's several people in this room who think like, oh, I can't sing, right? That's something that if you didn't have a whole lot of really good voices around on recorded technology wouldn't have occurred to you, because nobody could sing. It's just something you do. You know, like, I mean, how many of you would go, oh, I can't talk, I have a terrible voice, right? It doesn't even make sense, right? And aside, how many of you know what Nipper the dog is sitting on here and what he's listening to? His master's voice. He's sitting on his dead human's coffin listening to a recording of his voice. Nothing, just a little morbid note for your day. Okay. When recording happens to film and the movie The Jazz Singer comes out and it has music on the soundtrack, half the musicians in the United States of America lose their jobs overnight because every movie theater had an in-house orchestra to provide the soundtrack for the film. They're fired, and you see the first, back to the predictive power of music, the very first examples of fear that robots were going to replace humans, that mechanized music was going to take human jobs. You would have a profit without honor when you had mechanical music. And believe it or not, around 1950, the American Federation of Musicians, the Musicians Union in the United States, went on strike saying they were going to I'm taking it back, 1940s, it was World War II. They went on strike saying they were going to refuse to record. They said, we will not be forced to play at our own funeral, right? And they struck for 2 years. There were congressional hearings about it. They said, you're harming the war effort by reducing morale because people don't have music and so on. Eventually, they went back to work. The audience didn't really feel sorry for them. They liked having their albums and their radio stations and things like that. James Kraft, who's written a history of this time where music became mechanized, argued that what you saw in this time, and his book goes up to 1950. It's a 1996 book, but the history he's writing is only up to 1950. And he argues that what you see then is a suggestion that the benefits of new technology are going to be distributed unevenly, that the people who already have the power are going to get more power. That's what happened when music became recorded. People had to move to the centers where there was the recording industry. They had to be the people who were mobile. You had a big split between every town has got orchestras to there's the New York Philharmonic is the good one, and otherwise you're a loser. Those kinds of splits where there's suddenly superstars and the rest are lucky if they eke out a living. That's thinking, this is pre-internet, right? And when we get to the internet, we see massive disruption of the music industry. We see huge decline in album sales. And what is selling now is not as popular as albums ever were. The scales of the graph on the right and the left are different, so don't mistake the height of the lines for being the same numbers. Now what we're seeing is digital singles are by far where the most revenue is. And actually just in the last few, I think maybe last year, streaming revenues overtook sales revenues in music media. So huge disruption of the music economy with this technology. And so you have a moment where if we stop for a second and we imagine ourselves in 2002 when MySpace has just happened, the whole culture is shifting toward a gig economy where work is becoming more transient and people are responsible for their own successes. Intimacy is becoming a public expectation that you're supposed to sell in order to make people feel good so that you can have customers. And the internet is simultaneously seems to be completely upending things, but is also offering forms of direct access to people, and audiences have been there since the very beginning. That's where the audiences are. So the musicians and the people who work with them start saying, well, obviously the solution to all of these lines going down is to monetize the fans. Get on Facebook, connect, engage, monetize, right? Engage, grow, monetize, optimize, monetize, monetize, monetize. Music stops being music and becomes content. This is my favorite, the cash cow waiting to be milked, which, you know, if any of you are music fans, raise your hand if you're a music fan and you identify as a cash cow. Could you be more insulting? I don't think so. It's not without reason that people are saying you should get on there and monetize the fans. MTV did a survey of young fans and found that artists are expected to be constantly accessible, offering unique and intimate moments to their fans, directly interacting with them, giving them intimate glimpses into the mundane daily activities. So, huge shift. Again, if you think back to that Mark Kelly quote where you might fall from the sky, now you're supposed to be providing intimate glimpses into your mundane daily activities. You know, hey, here I am brushing my teeth. Part of this is about maintaining visibility. So one woman I spoke with, Greta Morgan, talked about, you know, people are so busy, if you can't find a way to sneak into their daily routine, they'll forget your show. Right? Again, total contrast to the past where, you know, if there was a band you liked coming to town, you had it on your calendar, you were counting down days, right? And now it's, I better remind you I'm there or you're going to forget, right? But it's not just about remaining visible, it's also about selling yourself, selling who you are, selling your personality. So this is Zoe Keating. Zoe is a cellist. She's classically trained. She is a looping musician. If you don't know what that means, it means that she's got a huge array of pedals and she'll play something and press a pedal and it will sound a particular way and then it will continue to repeat that sound while she plays other things. So she's able to build these really elaborate, beautiful soundscapes. So she's a solo looping instrumental cellist, right? Not the world's most popular genre. She's from San Francisco. She worked in information technology. At some point when Twitter got going, Twitter used to have a list of if you've just created an account and you don't know who to follow, you could press this button and they would just give you a bunch of people to follow automatically. And somebody put her on that list. So despite the fact that she's in a very niche genre, she has over 1.5 million followers on Twitter. Clearly a much larger audience than her listening audience. So she talked to me about how people can hear her music, but it's because she's able to be vocal about the fact that she lives entirely on album sales that she sells it. So she says, I get these emails a lot, like people have been listeners for a while, and it wasn't until they got to know me on Twitter that they bought my album. Right? So if you think about it, what does it mean? What are they paying for? Right? They've already got the music. They've already been listening. They're paying because they've gotten to know her and they feel a sense of obligation. There's a personal sense of connection that makes them want to pay her. This then extends offline. So you see phenomena like the rise of meet and greets, where you pay some money and you get to go meet your favorite celebrity. This is Rihanna, who's been celebrated as sort of the best at doing these things. And if you look at what she does when she has meet and greets, she has, or at least appears to have, a really great time, and so do they. And it is startlingly intimate, right? This is just, I didn't put this collection together. I just did a search for Rihanna meet and greet, right? And what you see is people grabbing her buttocks, and she's grabbing his buttocks. She's grabbing boobs, and she's smiling. They're humping each other. I mean, this is incredibly intimate poses, right? And everybody looks like they're having a blast. BuzzFeed did a piece a while ago where they contrasted Rihanna's meet and greets with Avril Lavigne's. And we all laugh because it's funny, right? It is a funny contrast. Lavigne doesn't like to be touched, right? I'm willing to bet that there are a lot of people in this room who are a lot more like Lavigne than they are like Rihanna, right? You would rather stand next to somebody than have them grab your boobs and grab theirs. That's actually probably how most of us are. So BuzzFeed does this article about how, Rihanna is so fabulous and Lavigne is so pathetic, and they actually do a graphic where they have the solar system and Lavigne's on one planet and the fan is on the other. I mean, it's brutal. 15 million views, hugely popular. Funny, engaging, love it, hilarious. You've got somebody dressed up as her making fun of it. You've got the price tags of how much they paid for the pictures there. So there's a lot to play with there, but there's also a really strong message that if you don't want to be intimate like this, you're doing it wrong and you deserve to be shamed, right? And I would like to question, why is that? Why, in order to have a career as a person who makes sound experiences for others to enjoy, you have to be willing to hug them and let them hug you? That seems like a very strange job requirement, right? Doesn't it? I mean, really. Imagine you're a waitress, but if you want to be a waitress, you have to grab the customer's genitals. That would not be okay, not at all. So as music becomes a business, people get pushed toward this. You gotta sell yourself. You gotta sell closeness. You gotta sell contact. And this is really pushed forward by the platforms. The platforms, Twitter. This is advice from Twitter about how musicians should use Twitter. So advice for musicians. And they say, for music fans, Twitter is the next best thing to being backstage. An interesting reference to the architecture of the concert hall. And for performers, connecting with your fans in an authentic way is one key to your success. A Twitter connection tells fans how much you appreciate them, and it also enables you to tailor your messages. The fact is, Twitter provides more authenticity and creative control than any other online medium. Tweets come straight from you and go right to your followers all over the world in real time. Some of these qualities, straight from you, right to your followers, all over the world, real time, those are technological affordances of the medium. Right? Those are just due to how Twitter is built, what its structure is. Authenticity is different, right? There's nothing about those four things that automatically means authentic, right? Authentic is sort of cultural baggage that emerges from this, or a cultural expectation that emerges from these affordances and from the social culture that's built up through them, so that authenticity has become more and more of an expectation. Authenticity is also something that's predicted very early in music. If you look at the history of country music, there's a great book by Richard Peterson about inventing country music and how the city slickers tried to come up with some authentically rural thing to satisfy people who had migrated to the cities from the farms. So those early authentic country things were kind of fake too. Relational affordances shape many, many qualities of the interactions. In the same way that concert hall shaped the separation of artists and audiences, the affordances of social media platforms changed the participation framework so that people have equal access to the floor, right? It's no longer that the people on stage get all the attention and are the only ones with the microphone. Now everybody has a microphone and everybody's competing for attention. If you think about that concert hall, it's as though the floor were flat and everybody has a microphone, right? Everybody can talk. And so how does the artist stand out then? There's a lot of other aspects of this that shift, and I spend a lot of time thinking through that in the book. The temporal aspects shift. So again, if you think back to the concert hall, I do a comparison of the stage, the merchandise table, and social media. And if you think about, say, the merchandise table after a show, you have this direct interaction, and it can be a very meaningful moment of interaction for both performers and artists. It can be very intimate. People will tell them things like, your song got me through somebody's death, or, I knew somebody who committed suicide also, things like that can be very, very powerful and affecting. But then they end, and you go home, and there's no expectation that you're going to be in touch tomorrow. Whereas with Twitter, with Facebook, with Instagram, they don't end. There's always the potential, if not the promise, that you could stay in touch. So continuously being expected to engage becomes a reality. The power balances shift so that it could be that your followers have more followers than you do, right? It kind of freaks me out sometimes. I don't have that many followers on social media, but I have more followers than some of my favorite artists, which seems a little goofy, right? Things that audiences make can become much more popular than things that the artists make. So it's not uncommon, for example, for a fan video to get many more views than an official video. And then there's a lot of limits on behavior that are sort of built into things like concert halls or merchandise tables that get suspended on social media. So if going to a concert is a really ritualistic thing where you just sort of know how to behave, social media doesn't offer any kind of, here's what we do on social media, right? We don't have those rituals. If on stage you're supposed to perform in your musical persona, if you're only in your musical persona online, people don't necessarily want that. They might, but they might not, right? They might want those authentic backstage glimpses instead of the onstage persona. If you only talk about music, that might be boring. People expect a broader range of topics, right? And the norms of what's appropriate, what's inappropriate are very much in flux, so nobody really knows exactly what am I supposed to do. Often they get in trouble with people they know because they've done something that went too far in one direction or another. So the expectations change. People may feel entitled to responses. So one of the things Zoe Keating told me was it used to be, oh my God, I can't believe you wrote back. And now it's, well, of course she wrote back, right? So I've had the experience of writing a really nice fan letter to somebody online and then being really hurt that he didn't respond. Like, what's wrong with me? He doesn't owe me a response, right? And in the past, I would have sent it and forgotten about it and never in a million years expected a reply. But I actually kind of was a little annoyed that he didn't write back. And then I interviewed him and found out why and forgave him. I didn't tell him. One consequence of these changes, of the way that these cultural trajectories have collided with social media platforms that push people in particular kinds of relational directions, is that relational dialectics that we always struggle with in all of our relationships get distorted or pushed in different kinds of ways. Now, relational dialectic is a push-pull tension in a relationship. So, for example, one that all of us have to manage in our closest relationships is the tension between wanting to be very close and interdependent with people, where they don't do things without consulting with us first, and of course we do those things together, and we make decisions together, and we advise each other, and also, leave me alone, I want to do what I want, don't bother me, I shouldn't have to talk to you before I do stuff, right? Both of those are very legitimate desires. Both of them are kind of inescapable. And yet we can't have both at the same time unless we get really creative with the way we frame things and we start saying things like, we're so interdependent that we can do our own things and still feel connected, right? Which is a very sophisticated way to manage that dialectic. That's just one example of a dialectic. Leslie Baxter and Barbara Montgomery have written quite a bit about relational dialectics, and they talk about the idea that from the perspective of relational dialectics, social life exists in and through communicative practices, and communication is the way that we give voice to these dialectics, these multiple, perhaps even infinite opposing tendencies. And they describe social life as an unfinished, ongoing dialogue in which a polyphony of dialectical voices struggle against one another to be heard, and that in that struggle they set the stage for future struggles. So you can think about communication as a constant effort to find a middle ground between opposing tendencies. And if we've gone too far in one direction, we may have to do a little bit of a correction, right? And we're doing this in our relationships with others. We're doing it at many levels, and there's many of them, and it's never done. It never gets fixed. You may find a balance point where things are going really well, and then, you're human. You evolve a little bit. Your relationship changes a little bit, and suddenly you want a little more independence, or suddenly you want a little more closeness, or so somebody pushes a little too far, and you need to back off in one way or another. So there's this constant jiggering of maintaining balance between multiple opposing tensions. There are two in particular that I focus on in the book that I think are at the core of relational labor. And one of them is the tension between the desire to control the people with whom you're relating. If you think about the fact that you're in a market economy, and that I'm talking about labor, I'm talking about work contexts. If you want money, you kind of have to control, right? You kind of have to manipulate to an extent. You need to try to manage people's behavior to move them toward buying your stuff and giving you money. That's just sort of the only way to be in capitalism. Now, you can be in music without being in capitalism. That's fine. You can play the guitar on your porch. You can be in the church choir. There's all kinds of ways to have music without needing to control the listeners. But if you would like them to pay you, it's pretty hard to get out of that need to manage them. And at the other side of it is that participatory culture, that participatory music, history, and desire to have community, to have groups of people who are engaging with one another, of which you're a part, rather than the object that is at the center of it or the boss of it. Or as Happy Tom from the band Turbo Negro told me, do you want to be part of a community that's all about sales? I think a lot of people kind of mix that up. They think we need a community. It's a big buzzword. Well, treat it like a community. Treat it like something you're a part of, not a sales channel. It's not a TV shop. That's something we should cherish like a little baby bird. I particularly love that he uses this cherish like a little baby bird because, as you can see, the Turbo Negro is not really the kind of band you think of as cherishing little baby birds. I would tell you the names of some of their albums and songs, but it's not appropriate. They have a really great fan culture that has got a uniform they wear. They've got all kinds of rules. They have hilarious rituals. They're just a scream. They're really, really funny. And they also did a poll of which they cared about more, and they found that by an overwhelming majority, they all preferred the fan club to the band. Which really speaks to that community versus control, right? What do you do if these people really care about each other and you're just an excuse, right? That's really hard for people to wrap their minds around. The other core tension that plays out is between being intimate and close and sharing those moments of daily life and having some distance, some professional distance. Some people don't want to come down from the sky. Some people would rather be in the sky. Some of us would rather have our artists be in the sky. I don't know about you, but if you've been following the Me Too movement at all, there's probably some guys who you used to like their art and now you don't so much because they've come down to earth and they're kind of gross. And as Lloyd Cole said, I've met some of my heroes and it's not always a good thing. And he goes on to say he thinks that the inequality in the relationship is part of what keeps it alive, and that one of the things that's possible with his web presence is that the last shards of his mystique are in danger of being completely obliterated. And this is something people worry about a lot. People who are artists, that the mystique is really important, not just to their image, but to their audience's pleasure that they can take in the work. So when Cole says this, he's not saying, I want my audience to idolize me. I yearn for power. I'm in this because I'm an egotist who's on a power trip. That's not what he's saying at all. What he's saying is that he's creating aesthetic objects, and for his audience to really appreciate them, they can't know too much about him. They have to be able to project their own worlds onto it, to see it as they want to see it, to appreciate its beauty. Erin McKeown, singer-songwriter, described Twitter and Facebook as demanding fresh personal content She is not a high mystique person. She doesn't care about mystique. That's not the issue for her. She's not worried about protecting her art. She's worried about protecting the difference between friends and fans. For her, it's very important that the things that she's willing to talk about with the few thousand followers she has online are not the same thing she's willing to talk about with friends and family. So she feels this pressure to, how do I have boundaries without the appearance of having boundaries? How can I interact in a way that's genuine and meaningful and real, but also isn't transparent and leaves her some privacy? The solution that she's found is to talk mostly about sports. She's a huge sports fan, and sports offers a nice, safe topic that's sincere and genuine and meaningful and tells you absolutely nothing about herself. So you might think, well, sure, these guys feel this way. If they feel that way, imagine how the big stars feel. And I was rather shocked to find that Roger O'Donnell, who plays keyboards in a little combo you may have heard of called The Cure, he was completely the opposite. He's all, I get emails from these people every day. I write back to them. We have great conversations. I don't even like to call them fans. I think of them as friends, right? And you might say, well, this is kind of facetious. But I think I take him at his word. I do think that he was sincere. And he also had, one of the reasons I think it's sincere is that he described moments that seemed so astute and sensitive to the interpersonal dynamics of his audience. So, for example, he talked about how he loved it when they started a song and he saw two people in the audience look at each other in a way where he could tell that that was their song, right? He also talked about being distracted when people move down to seats that aren't theirs and security has to intervene to send them back. You'd think these people don't see any of this happening, but he's watching it all. A lot of people had very interesting things to say about seeing the audience from the stage. I put this up in part because I want to emphasize that although I'm talking about relational labor as added work, as something that may or may not actually be useful, as something that's very challenging, that pushes you in this way and that needs to be managed all the time, that requires a lot of effort, it can also be profoundly validating. It can be really good for people. So you look at Rihanna, it looks like she's having a good time. You know, I don't want to say she shouldn't be doing that any more than I want to say Avril Lavigne shouldn't be doing what she's doing. People told me stories of receiving emails or personal messages that made them understand their work and their self-worth and their value in ways that they had never imagined. So, for instance, one question I asked almost everybody was, give me an example of an interaction with somebody from your audience you found very rewarding. And one of the things that I heard over and over and over, the thing I heard the most was hearing from somebody who said that their music was getting them through death, the death of somebody that they loved, or in one case, a fan wrote to say that his mother was dying and the mother's deathbed song request was a song of his. Right? So he said, it never even occurred to me that our music could reach that far into somebody's emotional life. Right? So it can be incredibly validating. It can help people understand what they do as much more meaningful than they themselves ever understood it before. So it can be great. At the same time, it's bad. That's part of the dialectic, right? So the last point I want to touch on is that I've tried to emphasize that we don't know that this actually works, right? We think it does, but we don't really know. What we do know is that there's a lot of money being made by people connecting online, right? So if you think back to James Kraft saying, up to 1950, if you look at technological developments in music, you get the sense that there's going to be some haves and have-nots. The benefits are going to be unevenly distributed so that those with power get more. Here's some examples of that now. Zuckerberg, of course, is the boss of Facebook. Ev Williams, co-founder of Twitter. And you can look at their net worths, and they're rather large, to say the least. Rihanna, most followed celebrity on Twitter, only worth a paltry $36 million in comparison to these guys. Right now, obviously, $36 million is a lot of money. And obviously, you can't evaluate the net worth of those two based only on celebrities like Rihanna. But you do sort of have to question the disparities here when even the most successful social media figures are not even coming close, right? And if Rihanna has just a tiny sliver of that value, we're getting way, 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 way less than that, right? Most people are nowhere near Rihanna. So as a whole, perhaps not as each individual, but as a whole, this sense that everybody has that they need to be online to build a presence so they can connect with others, so that they can be hired, they can be marketable in the future, this kind of relational labor that so many of us engage in. If we say, well, it's making money for someone, who's that someone? It's the people who own stakes in the platform. Those are the people who we know are making money from this, right? And that may or may not be a bad thing, but I think we can ask, is it equitable, right? Is it being done equitably? And I would say no, that we need more ways to push some of that revenue down to the people who are doing the labor of creating all of that content as they relate to one another that keeps these guys in business. All right, so in sum, bada bada boom, you have this history of audiences being at the leading edge of the internet who really create a realm of how audiences are going to interact with each other prior to MySpace happening, the point when musicians discover they should perhaps be connecting. You have this cultural history of intimacy being ever more commodified as something to be bought and sold as a service. You have the rise of the gig economy where more and more people are living like musicians, going from gig to gig, freelancing. You have social media that afford particular kinds of relationships that distort the pressures on these dialectics. And the upshot of it is that you have a demand for this kind of dialectical relational labor that may or may not profit participants, stay tuned, but we know creates profits for platforms. So I will leave it there, and I'm really happy to take questions and thoughts and things. So thank you so much. Do you want to moderate, Mary?
Questions?
Come at me. Yes, ma'am.
So I've recently read somewhere where I guess musicians, poker players, writers are always looked down upon at first until they start making money, the real money, and then everyone loves them. So I was saying, do you have anything to say on that?
Everybody loves a winner. I mean, it is interesting because we do look down our noses at that kind of work, and I think it's we call it play, right? You play poker, you play music, and play is of course not work. There's work and there's play. Right? And so that's part of why I'm trying to call it labor, to point out that this is work, man. Musicians are workers. These people are working. If you're a professional poker player, you're working. If you're an esports athlete, you're working, right? So it's easy to look at all this stuff as play. You're a sportsman, you know? If you're trying to be a professional athlete, you're working. You're training hard. That's work, right? So I guess what I hope to do is to help people who might think of that as play that should be looked down on as work, and understand the kinds of work that it entails as work. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. So I was really struck by what you said towards the end about how you expected that if the smaller stars felt sort of burdened by this, that the bigger stars would feel even more burdened, but in fact that wasn't always the case. And I wonder, I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that, and if that was a sort of patterned thing that you found, and if so, maybe that's, maybe there's something to say there about the extent to which your structural position in the industry, makes this feel more or less like an obligation versus an extra nice optional thing. Was the level of pressure felt distinct for different artists? Because I was thinking of Beyonce, and I wouldn't say she's particularly posting about her breakfast. I don't know. She's a little bit more remote.
She's interesting because she's extremely curated, but she's also approving every single piece that gets. So she's very controlling of her image, right? She's super involved.
And it's very polished. It's not.
It's very polished.
You're seeing me in the kitchen with my kids at home. I mean,
right.
or not always.
Right. Because we don't want her on Earth. Nobody wants Queen Bey on Earth.
Right. So is that, I guess, I'm interested in whether the more, the musicians who are sort of up and coming, whose position had not yet been secured in terms of their financial stability in this industry, felt more of a demand, that it was a non-negotiable to do this kind of relational labor.
You know, that's a great question, and I have to say that I did all those things you're supposed to do, that like Miles and Huberman tell you about, doing matrices to try and determine different axes of differentiation in the data, and I put men against women and old artists against new artists and successful ones against small ones, and I couldn't find patterns to save my life. And what I finally came down to was, I believe it's a very individualist thing, and some of it has to do with introversion and extroversion, but I think that a lot of it has to do with what they understand music to be, that the ones for whom relational labor was a pleasure that they wanted to engage in, they were people for whom music was a means to reach people and to relate to people. And the ones for whom they didn't like it, music was sort of more about craft work, right? Making a thing, a beautiful thing, or a fun thing, or a playful thing, or an enjoyable thing. So I'm sure there are some dynamics there, but I don't know what they are. I think you're right that the people who are already extremely successful are not under the same pressure to use it and don't feel the same pressure. But that said, I also talked to a lot of smaller artists who didn't feel pressure or who were rejecting the pressure, who would say, you know, I know that one of these days I'll get around to using social media, but I just don't feel like it yet. I don't have anything against it. I just, you know, one of these days I'll do it. Nacho Vegas, at the time I interviewed him, said, you know, one of these days I'll start doing it, but And he did, eventually. He got into it, you know, and now he's tweeting radical Spanish politics all the time and never says anything about music unless he's got an album out. I will say that the people I talked to who'd been at it a long time, Roger O'Donnell included, they talked about, Mike Timmons from the Cowboy Junkies would be another person who talked about this. They talked about that they thought that the fact that they had been successful in the 70s and the 80s, in the 90s, meant that they knew how the industry worked, and that they felt now that they had no idea how it worked, and that for the last decade, all of their conversations with their musician friends are like, how does this even work? What is it? I don't even understand. What is this thing? And that 10 years later, they still felt they were still having those same conversations of confusion. So they may feel somewhat less pressured to use it, but they don't feel any less confused and overwhelmed by it. Yeah.
I wonder though if, you know, more successful artists they can pay people to kind of do some of this work for them or help them sort of facilitate the social media relationship. I think that's an advantage to a certain extent, don't you think?
Yes and no. I mean, yeah. Yes, it is. There's some stuff that can get streamlined. There's some stuff that you can take over. But again, artists differ in how willing they are to cede their voice to others, right? Some of them feel that they need to, so that even Beyonce, right, feels like, you know, she's got to have, there's nothing going out under my name that I didn't say it was okay, right, at least. So, yeah, she's got staff who manage that, but it's still part of her workload. Right. So, and I will say also that in talking to people who do social media work for musicians, they talk a lot about that when they manage social media as the management, audiences are like, yeah, thanks for telling me what's going on. But when it's the artists themselves doing it, the audience is really engaged. That the click-through rates go up, the views go, everything changes, right? So, yes, they can hire people to manage it, but it doesn't seem to be as engaging. Doesn't serve the function. And I will point out, like somebody like Adele skipped the whole thing, and it didn't seem to harm her career in the least bit, right? That she didn't bother with social media, right? And there are other artists you can point to who have amazing social media and sell no music. So the correlations are a little bit wacky. Yes?
So kind of building on Mary's question and thinking about the idea of monetizing your fan base, is there pressure from the industry on the performers to have a more polished kind of someone curating your image and sort of taking almost like Rihanna and saying, okay, if we have our artists sort of model this kind of behavior and almost turning it into a recipe or a formula for success and connection, Is it starting to feel, are they feeling that pressure, and does it start to feel like, oh, well, this is just sort of role-playing or a gimmick and it's not really authentic anymore, and that the fans are starting to realize that, oh,
looks the same.
you know, someone is behind Beyonce. Yes, she may be approving it, but it's not really Beyonce doing it.
The music industry is not sure what to do about this social media stuff either, right? This week I was up in New York City, and a director of strategy at a major label invited me to come by because they don't know what to do about these crazy audiences. They're doing stuff and they know it's really important, and you know, and the head of marketing was there, and he was saying, you know, I mean, we talk to management, we tell them, get your guys online, do stuff, how can we help? But no, there's no recipes. Nobody's got like, here's the 10-step recipe that's going to work for everybody. And it wouldn't really work if they did, because their audiences are very, very different. So, you know, an audience that's located in, well, for example, they were comparing two of their artists, one of whom their largest American audience is in Mississippi, and the other, the largest American audience, is in Vermont, right? So you can't assume that the same recipe is going to play in two parts of the country that are that culturally distinct. So I think in general there's just a lot of confusion. I would say also that one phenomenon that's going on here that's interesting is this sort of professionalization of the influencer, where it's not necessarily the celebrity who's the person who's doing the social media, but you're trying to find the influencers. So one of the things that certainly labels and intellectual property cultural entities in general are doing is trying to find the people who are the influencers in their audience and elevate those. And you have this weird emergent influencer industry where you actually have personality curation agencies where they're seeking to find the influencers and cultivate them into authentic celebrities. And so it's all very in flux. I'll refer you to Crystal Abedin, has a great new book about this, a small book, Abidin, Crystal Abedin, called Online Celebrity. She's got another book coming out later. She's a powerhouse. She's doing some amazing work about influencer industries. An aside, but an interesting twist on all that, too.
Okay, there's a question over there.
I want to know, how many genres of music that you looked at, and if you, you said you didn't really find any correlation between it, but if you were to look at rap, I'm thinking rap, these kids come from homes that, aren't that good. That's what their stories are about in their music.
You mean the performers?
Yeah. In my mind, thinking that they would have a more connection to their fan base than a pop singer would. Do you think that too, and did you find that at all?
I didn't talk to very many hip-hop artists. I tried really hard. I think there is something about any kind of genre that had to push against the industry to get any kind of recognition. And certainly in the case of hip-hop, the fact that it's been marginalized, that it's operated through playlists rather than radio airplay, that it's circulated in venues that are not the fancy concert halls. All of that means that, as a hip-hop promoter, I heard speak once, says, they've always been hustling, right? So the digital hustle is really easy, right? And there is certainly work in musicology about the way that those relationships have been much closer historically, yeah, because of that common marginalization and having to work outside the industry in order to have a career in the first place. So yes, I think that's true. At the same time, I didn't find differences in genre in terms of people's desire to engage in relational labor. That seems to be, so maybe hip-hop artists feel like they have to do it, but that doesn't mean it's any easier for them or they want to, or maybe they've been doing it longer and did it already, but it still doesn't necessarily mean it's fun. I will say that you see a huge amount of innovation in this space in hip-hop. Yeah.
This will have to be the last question, just
Oh, sorry about that.
Make it good.
Well, you've already laid it out with talking about like looking at the matrices of everything you have, and it's hard to say, well, this is going on or that's going on. There's definitely a lot of things going on, but kind of tying to that, what I'm always interested in is like political economy of DIY music, right?
Yeah.
And to see Chance the Rapper win a Grammy without a record label it's mind-blowing. It is utterly impossible. Like, that is just not at all possible. Obviously it is, but, you know, if you had asked anyone, there's like no way that could even happen whatsoever, right? So I'm a big fan of Bandcamp, so I see that that's like the first app if we're like reading in Western reading style, is like your top left. Have you seen a shift to more DIY, this more empowerment for artists where, you know, we can do this ourselves, we can handle this ourselves?
No question.
And kind of going back to calling out this idea of like, well, a major label is going to get you an influencer. And it sounds so lame, you know, like this, like just, no matter how good you are, it sounds like, you know, lame. But, you know.
Lame but well funded.
Well, yeah, and there's probably even almost an interestingness. I'm sure certain people do lame very well. So there's probably even an interesting twist about that. I'm thinking of like Entourage and some sort of a weird scheme. But have you seen a shift with like DIY or empowering, or where artists, I know, what's her name from Till Tuesday, Amy Mann, was talking, this was a few years back, of like, I sell a lot less tickets and a lot less CDs, but I make more of a percentage. I do better now, and that's fine for me, you know?
Right. Yeah.
What's going on in that DIY area from what you've seen?
All of the things that you've said, although I would say that I was surprised at the extent to which even the artists I spoke to who were the indiest of them all were just like, well, of course, there's always going to be a role for the major labels. We're always going to need the majors because if you really want to break at that scale, you need that kind of machine behind you. There's no question that it's much more accessible to make higher quality music. We can all get GarageBand and we can make music that sounds really good. We can put it up on YouTube. We can put it up on SoundCloud. We can reach audiences. And a lot of people celebrate that, including people like Kristen Hirsch, who had a major label deal for a while, and then it fell apart, and now she, for the last 20 years, has functioned based on listener subscriptions. So people have been subscribing to her for 20 years through annual subscriptions. It's been how she's been funding her career. So there's a lot of really innovative things happening in that kind of DIY space, and certainly people have more capacity to make things and more capacity to distribute things. There's also much more competition for attention for that exact same reason, that if you go to SoundCloud, where do you start? Right? If you go to YouTube, where do you start? So yes, the possibility of creating is much better. The possibility of breaking through and becoming financially viable may or may not have become any easier than it ever used to be. So I guess that's kind of what I'm finding. And again, I will say one other edge of the DIY thing is that you do have an element of DIY that sort of says, screw social media, we're going to do it without it, and we're going to do fanzines, and we're going to do flyers, and we're going to do cassettes, and we're going to have a name that you can't search because it's such a common word. And so there is, there is the DIY resistance of it all, too.
Nancy will hang out for a little bit longer. If anybody wants to come up, say hello, have a book sign. Just let's give her a big Rutgers thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.